This is Where We Live. I'm John Dankosky. Today it's a continuation of our Where We Vote series as we welcome back former Stanford Mayor Dan Malloy. He's a Democrat running for governor. Tomorrow we'll take a one-day break from the governor's race and talk with Senate candidate Rob Simmons. And on Wednesday we'll chat with Lieutenant Governor Mike Fedeli. As always, you can email us your questions at wherewelive@WNPR.org or tweet us at Where We Live. You can call today 860-275-7266. Coming up tomorrow and Wednesday, you'll also have a chance to take part in simulcast debates with the gubernatorial candidates, which we're producing along with WFSB, Channel 3, and CPTV. Dennis House and I will moderate a Democratic debate tomorrow and a Republican debate on Wednesday. You can hear them at 3 and 8 on WNPR. Watch them at 8 p.m. on CPTV and 3 p.m. on WFSB. It's all on our website if that's very confusing. You can also ask questions by going to yourpublicmedia.org and clicking on You Ask the Questions. Now that that's all out of the way, I want to welcome back the cameras of CTN, the Connecticut Network, and welcome back Dan Malloy to the show. Thanks for being here.
Great to be here.
So let's see. Again, the phone number is 860-275-7266. We'll get to some of your calls in just a couple of minutes. First of all, let's start by talking about the campaign. I spent the first couple of minutes talking with Ned Lamont about the campaign and debates, that sort of thing. I'm glad we're all debating tomorrow. But by most accounts, this campaign has gotten pretty rough. Attack ads coming from both your campaign and the Lamont campaign. First of all, why do you think it's gotten so negative?
Well, I think it's close. And I think when that happens, things happen in a campaign. But I'm going to push back a little bit here. You know, the two things that my ads say is simply that he is running on the basis of being a successful small businessman. He once had 120 employees. He now has 7 in the state of Connecticut. I think that's a legitimate question. With respect to the bias lawsuit, you know, he should disclose what the settlement was. That's reality. You know, in government, you can't have confidentiality agreements. You can't keep those sorts of things away from public purview. People have a right to know.
But in private business, you don't have to, and you're a lawyer, you know that. And if you were representing a company, you'd certainly say you don't have to put that out there. It's a private matter. From what I understand, it was settled privately. And I think what is being suggested by some people is that it's inappropriately saying that Ned Lamont somehow is a racist because someone has filed a racial discrimination lawsuit.
No one said he's a racist. What they've said is that he should answer the questions. That's the reality. And I want to push back a little bit here, too.
Sure.
Yeah, I practice law, and confidentiality agreements simply aren't that common. They don't really come about very often. This lawsuit was settled just weeks before trial. Someone asked for a confidentiality agreement, hoping to keep the details private. I understand that, but now you're running for public office. Answer it.
And so then he, of course, brings up issues about your time as mayor of Stanford. And again, so what he's saying is, even though some of the allegations that were lodged against you, the investigations that went on while you were mayor of Stanford, you say that you were cleared of all wrongdoing. Indeed, he wants more answers to those questions. Isn't it his right to ask for more answers from you?
We've answered those questions. Listen, you know, this is very interesting. You know, wealthy people like to make their own rules and then decide who wins. In the case of that investigation, you know, I know, not only was I cleared, but I was thanked for my full cooperation. I didn't lawyer up and do that sort of thing. I didn't, you know, there's no confidentiality agreements. Government's an open book. That's what it is. And I understand that wealthy people like Linda McMahon and Tom Foley and Ned Lamont want to, you know, throw their money around in an attempt to buy an office. After all, let's focus for a moment. Ned Lamont talks about other people being professional politicians. This is a guy who ran unsuccessfully for the state Senate. Then he ran for the Senate and spent $17 million of his own money, and so far spent $7 million in this race that we know of. He spent $25 million in the last 4 years in pursuit of public office in Connecticut. Do you know how many children that would feed? Do you know how many scholarships that would give? Do you know how many ills that would right? It's a very different matter. And you know, it's this sense of entitlement that some people have with respect to running for office or setting their own rules. I mean, after all, Ned Lamont for a month refused to debate me. And the only reason he's debating is not because he wants to. It's because the people of Connecticut demanded that he do that. The pressure on him was so great by the people of Connecticut saying, hey, listen, you don't get to make the rules. We make the rules. And that's what government's all about.
The flip side of all this, of course, is you and Mike Fedeli, the lieutenant governor who is running as a Republican, are both taking public campaign finance dollars, and the wealthier candidates in this race are saying, well, look, we're self-financing to be sure, but you're spending taxpayer dollars to run a campaign that, again, has negative ads and everything else, and a lot of Connecticut people just looking at it from their own pocketbook standpoint are saying, hey, look, we're paying for ads from Mike Fidelli or Dan Malloy to attack their opponents?
Well, let's be very clear. I want to talk about issues. That's why I'm here.
Sure,
and as soon as we wrap this up and get it aside, the sooner the better. But I want to drill down here for a moment. You know, I'm running against a guy in a Democratic primary. That guy has gone around and said in 2006 that he supported campaign finance reform. He was an advocate. This was the greatest system. We had to get big money out of politics. That's what he said. And he said it up until the day he decided to run for governor. And then as a wealthy guy who could self-finance said, well, you know, that rule doesn't apply to me. I mean, that's really what's happened here. So it doesn't apply to him. He gets to make the rules that apply to him. He gets to decide whether you win the contest by his rules. That's just not how elections work in Connecticut. The people of Connecticut will decide this election. And overwhelmingly, the people of Connecticut want clean elections. It's these three folks who don't want clean elections. I mean, that's the reality. Linda McMahon wants to spend $50 million. Ned Lamont wants to spend $17 million on one race and $7 million, $8 million in a primary. And Mr. Foley, we're not sure exactly how much he's spending. They just, you know, there's this sense of entitlement. We're wealthy, therefore we get to do what we want.
The legislature wants to fix this campaign finance system and be able to throw a little bit more money into the race for the fall. The governor is not so sure about this. On its base level, what do you think about the way the public financing system has worked so far during this campaign for governor? What do you think needs to be done to fix it? And obviously, you and Mike Fidelli are two people right in the middle of it who might have a say on how it moves forward in the future, but also have a lot at stake because of it right now.
It's a great system. And the only problem with this system is that George Bush was not only elected, he was reelected. And what he ended up doing was packing the court with the courts with judges who think that corporations are individuals. And even, let's go a step further. His court has actually ruled that foreign corporations should be treated as individuals in this country. I mean, it is a bizarre concept. And it is, and just so that listeners know what the Bush courts are saying is that somehow by having a public finance system that has a trigger to help match or give additional monies when you have a self-finance campaign, that is curbing Mrs. McMahon's or Mr. Foley's or Mr. Lamont's constitutional rights of free speech. It is a bizarre concept. I look forward to the day when right-thinking people are serving on the federal bench again.
One of the things Tom Foley, though, said about the system is by taking away the ability of, say, lobbyists to give at a higher level, it's taking away some of their free speech rights. I mean, are there things about this that could be fixed? I mean, I don't think anybody's going to say that just because a so-called clean elections program is in, we have completely and utterly clean elections. Do you think that that's one provision that maybe is a little strange, limiting people's ability to give, say, as lobbyists?
Well, I don't think people in Connecticut want lobbyists writing out big checks. I mean, let's be honest, they don't. Whether in the fix that was passed, limiting those numbers to a number and an amount is the appropriate constitutional answer. I think it probably is. And so that was addressed in this fix. So let's see if the governor is actually going to say that lobbyists should have unfettered rights to give large amounts to candidates. We'll see where the governor really is on this issue. After all, and I want to go back to something. You know, under the old program, a candidate could receive up to $9 million in the general election. What the legislature has said is they're going to cap that at a lower number.
We're talking with Dan Malloy. He's a Democrat. He's running for governor. You can join us at 860-275-7266. You can email us where we live at WNPR.org. It's a continuation of our Where We Vote series. We give you a chance to directly ask questions of the candidates. We're closing in on the August 10th primary. Of course, you know, a lot of people are on vacation. We're trying to make sure people know that there's an August 10th primary. That's why we're doing these. Let's go first to Stephen in Wyndham. Hi, Stephen. You're on Where We Live.
Hi, fellas. How's it going? I saw the candidates when they came down to the Wyndham Chamber of Commerce, and so one of the candidates mentioned the term speed dating because it was such a rushed forum. I'm having a hard sense of what personalities these guys, what's their real personalities. I'm looking for, you know, honesty, truth, valor, perseverance. You know, I don't care if they're rich. The Kennedys are from a very rich family, and you know, 3 of their brothers gave their lives to this country in really tragic ways. I'm looking for personality and substance.
Well, Stephen, we'll put that to Dan Malloy. So Stephen wants to hear a little bit more about you.
Yeah. Well, I tell this story. I grew up under different circumstances than a lot of people. When I was born with severe physical and learning disabilities. I was spastic as an infant. It took years of therapy to overcome the physical aspects of my disability. I didn't really recover all of the appropriate uses of my limbs and dexterity until about 8th grade. I really had almost no academic success for a long period of time. In fact, as late as the 4th grade, I was thought to be mentally retarded, as that term was used in those days. Now, my mother knew that that wasn't true, and she committed herself to concentrating on the things that I was good at, and that made all the difference. So I made some progress. I started to have some academic success late in high school. A college not so far from here, Boston College, a Jesuit institution, took a chance on me. I was the first person admitted to that school on the basis of having a learning disability, and they actually designed a whole program that is in existence today around that. When I went away to college in 1973, I was still listening to all my textbooks on recorded books for the blind, and did so through the first semester of my sophomore year. I stayed at Boston College after that. I graduated with second high honors, magna cum laude. I stayed for law school, and when I took the bar exam in 3 different states, I was the first person to take the essay portion orally who wasn't otherwise blind. So I blazed some trails. I am committed to public service, but after law school, I became an assistant district attorney in Brooklyn, New York. I tried 23 felony cases. I had convictions in 22 of those cases, and in the last 4 of those were homicides. When I was done with that commitment, I went back to Stanford, where I'd been born and raised, got into a small general practice law firm, a small business, if you will. I tried cases. I handled all kinds of matters. But I also did something that a lot of other people do in towns and cities across Connecticut. I got involved in my local government. I served on the Board of Finance and on the Board of Education, and I coached soccer and cared about the environment. And then 14 and a half years ago, I became mayor of the city of Stanford. And we did some remarkable things. We lowered crime by 63%, making Stanford one of the 10 safest cities in America. We built housing and affordable housing and require that 10% of all new units of housing multifamily be set aside as affordable. We rebuilt our infrastructure, improved our environment, de-dammed a river that's been dammed for 300 years, added hundreds of acres of open space. Those are the kinds of things that I did and would like to be able to replicate. One other thing I did that I'm particularly fond of, and maybe it relates to growing up with learning disabilities, I moved our city in the direction of being able to guarantee every 4-year-old at least 1 year of pre-kindergarten learning experience, a goal that I have for the state of Connecticut.
Dan Malloy is our guest, and we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to get to some more of your questions. 860-275-7266. This is your chance to ask questions of the candidates for governor, so why don't you give us a call right now, 860-275-7266. This is Where We Live. This is Where We Live. I'm John Dankosk. It's a continuation of our Where We Vote series. Former Stanford Mayor Dan Malloy, who is a Democrat running for governor in the primary against Ned Lamont coming up on August 10th. You can ask your questions at 860-275-7266. We'll get to some of those questions in just one moment. Obviously, the big thing top of mind for a lot of people is the huge budget hole that we have here in the state. Let's get into some specifics, because I've been asking everyone. I'll continue to ask people about specific ideas for cutting this budget deficit, finding ways to cut the overall size of state government, maybe finding some new revenue sources along the way. Baseline, what's your plan to do this, to fill this hole that's $3-some billion in 2012 and then just keeps getting bigger year on end?
Well, what we have to do is right-size government. I'm not for slashing and burning. I'm for making sure that we have people in the positions to make the decisions and move the state forward. Now, I believe that Connecticut's government is too top-heavy and too top-down, and that's why I've taken the pledge to reducing directly and immediately the side of government that the governor directs, the non-civil service, partisan positions, by 15% at a minimum. Because if I don't do that, how do I have a discussion with any labor leader about sacrifices or struggles that we're all going to jointly face? We also, we have to look under every rock. We have to find money. The unions have been running around the state with lists of ideas on how to save money, and this administration has stiff-armed them. I've said right off the bat, let's sit down. We're either going to implement those changes or we're going to explain to you publicly why they don't make any sense and why they won't save money. We're going to look at how many cars state employees are taking home, and those cars which aren't covered by collective bargaining will eliminate, and others maybe will seek to open collective bargaining about. I think it probably makes a lot more sense to reimburse people if we can do that for the use of their own vehicles as opposed to having those kinds of expenses. We're going to look at purchasing things differently. I was struck a story that a corrections officer told me about putting in new equipment into some of the prisons, and they needed to buy some TVs. And so he went to Best Buy and got the price. Then he went back to his supervisor, and his supervisor said, no, you can't buy them from Best Buy. You got to buy them off the state bid list. Well, they were about $100, $70 to $100 more per TV off the state bid list. And in part, that's because we don't bid commodities regularly. We bid it once or twice a year for the most part. So I then talked to some people in the IT department at a couple of community colleges, and I said, hey, listen, if I asked you to build me a daily bidding system modeled after eBay for commodities that the state uses, could you do that for me? And they said, sure, we could. So we're going to have to do a lot of that sort of stuff. We're going to have to change how we buy. We're also going to have to push decision-making down to the lowest possible level. A clerk at a counter should be able to make certain decisions without kicking those upstairs to be kicked upstairs, to be kicked upstairs, to be kicked upstairs. So we're going to create an environment in which people are authorized and expected and required to make decisions, use technology in making those decisions, modernize the technology, and then and therefore eliminate a whole lot of different stages or different levels of governance. We looked at the DOT, and it's reported that the DOT, from the highest civil service position to the commissioner, has 7 additional layers of management. We've got to eliminate it. We've got to wipe some of that out.
So that's on the cutting side, and you say right-sizing government. Many people take a look at our state government and say, we just don't have the revenue sources necessary. I've asked Ned Lamont about this. He says, we haven't earned the right to talk about taxes in the state. Do you think we've earned the right to talk about taxes in the state? And what's your plan? Because I think people want to know if indeed you feel like we've got to raise taxes when you're governor. Well, tell us about it. How are you going to do it? Who are you going to raise the taxes on?
Well, that's an interesting, that's a soundbite that Ned's been using for some period of time. We haven't earned the right. Well, how do you ever earn the right? I mean, really, it's kind of a silly thought process. Say what you mean, Ned. Do you believe there are $3.5 billion in cuts to be made in this budget? And if you do, what would you cut? Because if you're simply going to hide behind a soundbite, we haven't earned the right, what it really is telling people is you can't wait to raise their taxes. And I'm going to take a different approach. I'm going to be out. No,
that's making a little bit of a leap, I think. I think to some people to suggest that this is just a stalking horse. He's going to definitely raise your taxes.
Let me be very clear. Yeah. I don't think there's $3.5 billion in cuts in this budget. I think if you cut $3.5 billion out of this budget in 1 year, you would devastate social services. You would devastate the government. It would not be operational. Now, on a long-term goal, should we downsize government? I've already said I believe it's too top-heavy and too top-down. But I want to be very clear. I don't think there's $3.5 billion. And if I told you that there was $3.5 billion, I'd be obligated to actually explain that to you. So it's not as if I'm running to be, I'm trying to earn the right to raise your taxes. I'm trying to earn the right to lead the state in a new direction. So this is what I'm going to do. I get sworn in on the 5th of January. Before I give a speech, I'm going to sign a document that says every state department will have to report under generally accepted accounting principles, GAAP, finance rules. And then I'll give my speech, and then I'll seek legislation at the legislature that makes GAAP the law of the land. You know why that's important? Connecticut's government requires that every local government and Board of Education report under GAAP, and then it exempts itself. The reality is, in this current operating budget, we're $2.5 billion in deficit, and we one-timed our way through this year. We need to start telling the truth to the people of the state of Connecticut. We need to be transparent. There are big decisions to make. We are going to cut government, but we're also going to have to look at the revenue side. I want to be right up front. I happen to be a Democrat. I don't believe you can cut $3.5 billion. I actually haven't heard a Republican say that you could cut $3.5 billion, and no one's come forward with a plan to say that. But if you want to close every nursing home, if you want to eliminate every service, or if you want to lay off, actually, let me give a statistic. If you laid off every state employee on the first day of the next budget and didn't rehire them until the last day of the budget, we would still be in deficit.
And we've certainly heard that before. That's right. And that's something that I think people have not really necessarily been paying attention to this time around. Let's go to the phones. 860-275-7266. You've got questions for Dan Malloy. He is running for governor of the state of Connecticut. He's a Democrat. Henry is first. You're in Hamden. Henry, go ahead. You're on Where We Live.
Hi. I have a question about executive leadership. I know that both Dan and Ned have been executives, one in the public sector and one in the private sector. And my question is, how do you think that might be, how that experience might be different, or how your experience might be an advantage compared to someone who can just hire and fire people as they see fit?
Henry, thank you.
Well, you know, there is a difference. I actually have both experiences. I was a small businessman. I was a partner in a law firm, and we had as many employees in the state of Connecticut as Ned Lamont does. And I did other things in business as well. But the difference is that for 14 years, I led a city with a $500 million budget, with 1,600 city-side employees and an equal number on the Board of Education side. The city grew while I was mayor by thousands of people, and yet when I was done being mayor, city-side government was 8.4% smaller than it had been when I became mayor, and we were providing more and better services, having lowered crime, having deprivatized some of the functions that had previously been privatized, and saving money by doing it. It's a body of experiences that other candidates don't have, and I'm proud of it. You know, some people call that being a professional politician. Well, quite frankly, I'm a professional community advocate. I've dedicated a portion of my life to community service. I believe it's the right thing. You know, my mother, when she was raising me, she saw that I had some leadership skills, and she would say, Daniel, you have an obligation to leave the world a better place for you having lived in it. And I have struggled to do that every day of my life.
You brought up there again Ned Lamont's company, how many people he employs in Connecticut, how many people he has employed. One issue that's come up during this campaign is your claim about job creation in your city. You said that you created 5,000 jobs in Stamford. The Hartford Courant has reported that some 13,000 jobs have been lost during the same time, signifying a net loss of some 8,000 jobs. How do you explain this disparity?
Well, first of all, the report's inaccurate. If you draw a line at 95 and at 2009, there's no such job loss. It just doesn't exist. There was a high and a low in the interim period. So, you know, do I get credits for producing a lot more jobs during part of my term? Many, many, many more than 5,000? Sure. I should get that, I suppose, would be that argument. Just as Ned says that the business circumstances changed and he had to eliminate 70% of his workforce, some other companies had to do that. But let's look at the record. We brought companies to Connecticut, RBS, UBS, NBC Universal. We brought Starwood Capital moving in, Nestle Waters moving into Stamford, Purdue moving into Stamford. Joe McGee, actually was the Economic Development Commissioner under the Weicker administration, has said that what Ned Lamont is saying, or what the Courant said, just isn't true, that we were responsible for more than 5,000 new jobs. But let's go one step further. When I became mayor in 1995, Stamford was like every other Northeast industrial city. It was losing jobs. It was losing, it appeared to be losing at least its middle class, if not population. We needed to restructure Stamford and build it in a different direction, and we did it. There's $3.3 billion, the largest private development in New England, underway in Stamford right now. And in fact, buildings of that development have already been completed and are occupied in the old industrial center of South End, where Pitney Bowes used to do its manufacturing. Did we lose some of those manufacturing jobs? Yes. Have we replaced them? The answer is yes.
One of the things that some might say, those companies that you mentioned that came in and brought all these jobs into Stamford, when the state gives big tax breaks to bring in companies, that's something that whittles away at the revenue streams over the course of time. Do you, as a governor, would you continue what Governor Rell has been doing over the course of the last several years and putting forward these big tax breaks for companies to try to get them to locate here in Connecticut?
When you can move jobs with tax breaks that level the playing field with other states, and that's all we should ever be seeking to do. Level the playing field with New York, with Massachusetts, with New Jersey, with Rhode Island, the states that we are in most competition with. If the amount of money being loaned or given to bring those jobs here actually pays for itself in a 5-year time frame, then it's a good deal. And if it doesn't, it's a bad deal. And I think the governor has done a lot of bad deals. But I'm going to tell you about my role as mayor of the city of Stamford for 14 years. I never did a city economic development package. It was always through the state. I drew a line. I said, I'm not going to compete against other communities in the state of Connecticut. We're not going to play this on an unfair basis. It doesn't make sense to be paying people to move from one city to the other. I never did it. So that really tells you where I come from when it comes to economic development packages. I think we need to level the playing field, and that's about it. Now, one other thing I have to say to you.
Sure.
You know, electric costs are killing our state. And I've been talking about electric costs for 5 years in this state. We're currently paying about a 76% premium over the national average price for electricity. You haven't heard, actually the one thing the governor did was veto something that might have addressed that. That is a major problem. It's one of the reasons I believe that we've lost more manufacturing jobs than any other state in New England or the Mid-Atlantic. For 5 years I've been pounding the pavement saying we need to do things to lower electric costs in the state of Connecticut. I think that's a bigger problem than anything else.
Getting back to the previous question, though, if your city wasn't putting forward the economic development packages and the state was taking credit for creating all those jobs in Stamford, some of that credit's got to go to the state for putting the packages forward to bring in those jobs.
Yeah, you know, you can say that, sure. But we built a city that lowered crime by 63%. In fact, around 80% around the train station. We improved our school system. We created universal pre-K. People wanted to move to Stamford. We began the process of closing the achievement gap that exists in this country in urban areas. We built affordable housing and required 10% to be set aside of all new multifamily housing to be set aside as affordable. We streamlined government. We weren't responsible for 1 day of delay in any of those major projects because we made our building department and our engineering department work. We coordinated the activities of government. We went out and recruited. I went down to New York City. We had functions in New York City where we would invite real estate professionals to come to a reception and hear about Stamford. Sure, my position was I'm not going to compete. So whatever package is offered needs to be offered through the state. But if in some way you're saying that Stamford didn't attract those jobs, you're just wrong because they didn't go to Greenwich. And they didn't go to Norwalk, and they didn't go to Darien, and they didn't go to New Canaan, and they didn't go to Yonkers, and they didn't go to Mount Vernon. They came to Stamford. That's where they came.
Dan Malloy was the mayor of Stamford. He's now running for the Democratic nomination for governor. You can join us at 860-275-7266. Lots of people want to ask questions now. Heather in Bristol. Hi, Heather. You're on Where We Live.
Hi, how you doing?
Doing good. What's up?
So I'm a college student, and I, like a lot of my friends, are thinking about what I'm going to be doing when I graduate. And I guess similar to what we're talking about bringing people into Stamford, I'm curious how you're going to keep young people in Connecticut, especially now that we're having such a hard time finding jobs. So how are you going to keep people, especially young, educated people, in the area?
Heather, thanks for the question. I mean, it really gets to the core of the issue. When you have a state that's dead last for job production and job growth over a 22-year period, that's Connecticut, then your young people are going to leave because they have to go find employment. And actually, they want to find employment where they think a state or a company is on the upswing, where it's not going to be closing its facilities in Connecticut. So I have to be a job activist. I have to spend so much of my time on the economic development and the job creation side of it. But let's be very clear. We need to build better bridges, better relationships with some of our large employers, because those large employers are key to Connecticut's economy, because so many of our small businesses are in fact associated or doing business with those large businesses. You know, I've put out a plan for a $500 million revolving fund to clean up brownfield sites in some of our communities. I'm talking about that because we could put so much property in so many of our cities back into use and clean up some factories and and some factory sites. It's part of the economic development package. We're going to begin recruiting firms to the state of Connecticut. I will play an activist role in doing that, just as I did in the city of Stamford. We're going to talk to companies within our state to find out what they feel the impediments are. We need to benchmark every tax. We need to benchmark every major regulation. We need to become business-friendly like Massachusetts has. You know, CNBC ranked Massachusetts as the 5th best state in which to do business. And in doing so, by the way, commented about their lower electric rates in comparison to neighboring states. They were talking about us in New York with some of the highest rates in the nation. I think if we can lower electric rates, if we can benchmark our tax structure and understand where it gives us a competitive advantage and disadvantage, if we can look at our regulations and make government work more rapidly, make government understand that time is money, if we can harness the abilities of our private universities and public universities and not be at war with them constantly, but actually working with them on economic development issues, I think we have the real potential of being a job creator again. And Heather, I want to do it for you and for the other young people of the state of Connecticut who do want to raise their families here.
Heather, thanks so much for the call. Peter is on a cell phone. Hi, Peter. You're on Where We Live.
Hi. Hello, Dan. Thanks for running for office and everything. My question to you is, if you want to save the state some money, don't you think that maybe decriminalizing some of the marijuana laws would keep a lot of people out of jail and save the state a ton of money? I'll take my question off the air.
And thank you very much, Peter.
You know, listen, this is an important question that has raged. You know, many states have moved in the direction of medical marijuana as well as decriminalizing. That's where I would draw the line. I'm not promoting the sale of narcotics or marijuana or anything else, but a serious consideration should be given to decriminalizing. And that's where I draw the line.
When you say decriminalizing, what specifically does that mean? Well,
it means you would treat it as a violation of a statute as opposed to a crime. That's what it means. So you would get a ticket. It would be, it could be $250, it could be $500 violation. But the idea of that's the direction I would move in.
As opposed to moving it where some people want to move it as an actual tax source for the state.
And I'm not going there.
You're not going there?
No, I'm not.
Okay. Let's go to Chris, who is in West Hartford. Hi, Chris. You're on with Dan Malloy.
Hi, Dan. I'm rooting for you or for Ned. I'm rooting for the Democrat to win this fall. But I think either one of you has to be ready for most likely Tom Foley with his war chest to beat you about the head and face, particularly yourself, as someone who surely along the way must have raised property taxes, who's going to delight in jacking people's taxes up through the roof. That being the case, our budget crisis being what it is, I say don't beat around the bush. You fuss at Ned for beating around the bush, and then you do the same. Tell people you're going to have to raise income taxes on the wealthy. It's really simple. Bill Clinton ran on that, 18 years ago and won. He beat an incumbent. So tell us you're going to raise the top marginal income tax on the wealthiest people in Connecticut to 6 or 7% to match neighboring states. It's going to raise a good amount of money, and yes, you're going to have to cut other stuff too. But just be straight about it. Don't beat around the bush. It bugs me, and it's when you have a simple Tom Foley message saying, I won't raise your taxes. I'm going to be real simple and tough and strong. You have to answer that, and you have to answer it forthrightly.
Hey, listen, it's great to talk to you. I recognize that Arkansas accent, by the way, and the reference to President Clinton. Listen, I have said time and time and time again, and in fact, I was the only candidate for a long period of time who said that whatever tax increases we levy should be in an effort to make our taxing system more progressive. I know you want me to use your words. And I'm not going to use your words. What I've said is we need a more progressive tax system. Now, there is no doubt that the middle class in the state of Connecticut spends a substantially higher percentage of their total gross earnings to pay property taxes and income taxes than wealthy people do. That's a reality. So when I say that if we're going to raise revenue, we're going to build a more progressive system, I mean it. We also have to get off this over-reliance reliance to property taxes. We're more reliant on property taxes to pay for education than any other state in the nation. It's not as if we get it right and every other state gets it wrong. It's just the opposite. And it is one of the reasons that Connecticut has this terrible regressive tax structure. Listen, if you want somebody who's going to do battle with the property tax system in the state of Connecticut, you might want to elect a mayor who actually did battle with it for 14 years.
I'm going to get to one more question before I break. Adam is in West Hartford. Hi, Adam. You're on Where We Live.
Hi, thank you for having me on. I want to preface my question by saying that I have not decided who I'm going to be voting for, but I'd like to know what Mr. Malloy's philosophy is about the use of negative campaign ads, and I'll take my answer off the air. Thanks.
Thank you, Adam.
I think negative campaign ads are tough, but let me just drill down on this thing. Ned Lamont sent a film crew to my house 4 weeks ago. Just let that sink in. Imagine if a film crew showed up outside your house. When you talk about negative campaigning, the nice thing about negative campaigns is they end. And I can't wait for this to be over. And that's why I've so enjoyed most of the time this morning talking about real issues. But what I have said, and I want to be very clear, what I've said is he's running on the basis of being a job creator. In fact, he has said in this state, in my presence, I've hired hundreds and hundreds of people. Well, guess what? There are 7 people working for his firm in Connecticut. And he once had 120 employees, and he now has something in the range of 35. But most of them are outside of the state of Connecticut. The other thing we've said is just answer. Just answer a question. That's all. And I understand he thinks that's negative, but I think he thinks it's negative because he's not used to being in public life. He's not used to understanding that there are no confidentiality agreements in public life.
And part of public life, unfortunately, in 2010, though, is having film crews probably come to your house, though, too.
No. Let's stop right there.
Yeah.
I didn't send a film crew to Ned Lamont's house. Just stop. Really. This is very serious stuff. And the presumption that all behaviors are the same simply is not true.
And I'm certainly not saying that it is. I'm just saying that as a candidate for office, for higher office in 2010, one might reasonably assume that that is the game that we're playing today. I will say, I don't like it any better, and the reason I asked you at the beginning about negative campaigning is because I wish we didn't have any negative campaigning. We just came and talked about the issues the whole time.
But let's put it back in context again. We shouldn't have negative campaigning, and we had a candidate who said he supported campaign finance and then broke it. Said he believed in debates. In fact, 4 years ago, followed Joe Lieberman screaming debate. Sounds like a Rolling Stones song. What a great song, by the way. He was screaming debate, and then decides after one televised debate, he was going to break his commitment to do 2 others. So, what is this all about? Is it really a belief that if you're born to the privileged class, you get to make the rules? I think it is, in part, about that. Listen, my mother was a school nurse. My dad sold insurance in a small agency. That's who I am. I'm not wealthy. I wasn't born on third. I'm just trying to do the best I can. And you know what? This thing's going to be over pretty quickly. So let's just, put our heads down, run through it, and get it done. And that's exactly what we're doing here on our Where We Vote series. We've got a lot more to talk about with Dan Malloy, and you can call us at 860-275-7266. You can send us an email, wherewelive@wnpr.org, or if you're on Twitter, you can tweet us at Where We Live. This is Where We Live. I'm John Dankosky. Coming up on tomorrow's show, Rob Simmons' campaign for Senate began back when Chris Dodd was still running for his current seat. Remember that? Then Simmons suspended his campaign after losing the state convention to Linda McMahon. Now he's back. And on the next Where We Live, we'll give you a chance to ask him questions as part of our Where We Vote series leading up to the August 10th primary. Of course, you can join us on air and online, WNPR.org, keyword where. And if you want to ask questions for the debates that are taking place in the governor's race tomorrow and Wednesday on WFSB, CPTV, and WNPR, you can go to yourpublicmedia.org, click on You Ask the Questions, and you can get some questions directly for the candidates. Right now, you have a chance to ask directly questions of Dan Malloy. He's running for governor. He's a Democrat. And let's go first to Sue in Woodbury. Hi, Sue. You're on Where We Live.
Hello there.
Hi. What's up?
Well, I read the legislation that Mr. Malloy just referred to that Governor Rell vetoed, and I agreed that she should. I work with the discount supplier, and it wasn't necessarily to protect my job, but after reading it, I thought creating a power authority is going to do nothing but increase the taxes in Connecticut and won't necessarily drive down the price of energy. So I'm interested in hearing from Mr. Malloy what he thinks we should do.
Well, I don't think the legislation actually does what you're saying it did. What it really said is that we had to move in a different direction, that deregulation has been a abysmal failure in the state of Connecticut, and I'll give you evidence of that. In 2008, final audited numbers, we were paying 5 cents per kilowatt hour more than Rhode Island, 3.5 cents per kilowatt hour more than Massachusetts, and 5.5 cents per kilowatt hour more than New Hampshire. It has been, it's just been brutal. In fact, I'll go so far as to say in many ways we've been subsidizing lower rates in other states. Now, there are problems. Part of that is that when we deregulated, we fell asleep at the wheel, or at least we didn't change our direction with respect to requiring these utilities to update the transmission system in a timely fashion. That's one of the reasons. The other is that we haven't done other things that other states have done. I want to be a governor, by the way, who champions the reduction of electricity by 15% in the state of Connecticut. A, you have 15% savings off the bat, but B, what that will do is substantially lower the cost of electricity, because so much of the cost of electricity in the state of Connecticut is tied to peak usage. And if we can reduce that peak usage, we're going to be in much better shape on the competitive marketplace. And then finally, I think the reverse auction that ISO New England does with respect to the purchase for redistribution purposes in New England is stacked against Connecticut, and I think we should be arguing for changes there. And actually, I said finally, I'm going to say finally again. And when we do make investments in new energy production facilities in Connecticut, I think we need to enter into preferential rate agreements that go around the ISO New England rules. So that's what I would do.
And thank you very much, Sue, for your question. Lucille is in Wethersfield. Hi, Lucille. You're on with Dan Malloy.
Hello?
Hi there. You're on the air. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
We sure can. Go ahead and ask your question. Yeah.
I can't hear you that well. But my question for Mr. Malloy is, it seems to me that not one of the gubernatorial candidates has addressed the issue of working with the legislature, and I feel that the legislature has been a major, major, major part of the problems that we're in right now, and I feel that they have not addressed any of our concerns as far as financial. It's like they've all got their heads stuck in the sand, like there aren't real problems there. And there are, and I don't think the electorate is stupid. We know that things are bad, and they just keep covering up.
Well, and so, let me put your question to Dan Malloy there, and I appreciate your call very much. Lucille asking, how do you deal with the legislature?
The most important piece of equipment that a governor has is a pen, because you can veto. If I don't agree with what the legislature is doing, and if I've done everything that I need to do as a leader before the decision is made, before the legislation is drafted, and I don't agree, then I won't be afraid to use the authority of the governor's office. But I also want to be very clear that I think we've gotten into this terrible trap in Connecticut where we leave it up to the legislature to develop good policy. I believe that the executive branch has to be the agency that is putting out new ideas, new concepts, drafting legislation, playing an activist role in making Connecticut a stronger and better place. And that's the way I'm going to run the state of Connecticut, the executive branch, if I become governor.
Let's go to Jesse in Windsor. Hi, Jesse. You're on Where We Live.
Hey, John. How are you?
Doing well. What's up?
Good. Appreciate you taking my call. I'm a relatively recent college graduate, under a year. I'm really nervous about all of our unfunded pension in the state of Connecticut. I don't plan to have a pension. I work in the private sector. I don't plan to take Social Security, but I'm not sure how I feel about this massive deficit and this coming out of my tax monies in the future.
Thanks, Jesse. Dan Malloy?
Well, Jesse, I got to stop you for a second. I mean, I hope you do have a pension. And Jesse, I'm proud that the Social Security system will be there to take care of you or your family.
Recent college graduates don't think they're going to get a pension, Dan.
I know that. I know that. But you know what? That's the national race to the bottom that Connecticut has the nation's been involved in. And if you're going to measure all of our successes against China, then be prepared for a style that is going to be significantly worse. I mean, in Connecticut, the bottom 20% of the population has really taken it on the chin, and the middle class has taken it on the chin. But he raises a valid question. What do we do about these unfunded obligations? I mean, I'm not happy with the governor and the legislature who agree on deferring $300 million in payments into those plans as a way to one-time the budget. That's why I'm saying we're going to have generally accepted accounting principles. The young man undoubtedly took an accounting course when he was in college. He knows what generally accepted accounting principles are. It means you can't hide things. You can't one-time them. You have to set in place plans to undo the damage that's been done to balance the budget. That's what I'm committed to doing, and that means that we have to get a lot of people around the table and have serious discussions about how we're going to do it, including labor, who legitimately represents the employees of the state of Connecticut, including members of the legislature, and some of the other good minds that need to be brought to it. Does this system continue the way it's being run? The answer is it can't.
Can I just circle back on something you were talking about just a moment ago? When you talked about the governor's greatest tool being a pen, you can veto legislation. We've certainly seen Governor Rell veto a lot of legislation. Are you saying that the way she's handled it is appropriate for a governor who has differences with the legislature? Do you think that you need to be more involved in crafting legislation? Just be a little bit more specific about what you meant, because a lot of people look at that and go, well, nothing's getting done because the legislature spends a lot of time trying to pass things. The governor vetoes it. We don't get anywhere.
I'm talking about a total change in the relationship between the executive branch and the legislative branch. I believe that the best, that good ideas, good legislation, good drafting should be a partnership between the administrative or executive branch and the legislative branch. That's what I'm saying. And what this governor has done is taken a total hands-off attitude and then picks and chooses between what she likes and what she doesn't like after the legislation is passed. That is, in my opinion, an illegitimate use of a veto. What I want to do is avoid vetoes, but when it comes to the budget, understand that may be unavoidable. We've got to put our house in order. We have to report under GAAP. We have to present to the state of Connecticut population a transparent plan to balance our budget over a period of time and to begin the process of fully funding our obligations. That's why I'm running for governor. You want somebody else? If you believe that someone else who doesn't speak that language, who doesn't want to do that, is a better candidate, then you need to vote for that person. I'm going to change Connecticut, period.
Ed is in stores. Go ahead, Ed. You're on Where We Live, and we're running a little low on time, so go ahead quickly with your question.
I just had a question for Mr. Malloy. This was regarding educational reform in the state of Connecticut. And I know for the second time up, we didn't get for the race to the top. And my question is, with standardized testing and all the emphasis on that, what's his view towards 21st century skills? I'll take the answer there.
Thank you, Ed.
I have a very long policy document on danmalloy.com, and I think we devote about 15 pages to educational policy, and I invite you to go see it. But in short order, what I would say is Connecticut has not reformed and repackaged itself to the extent that we need to do it. And in the body of recommendations I'm making, I'm saying we need to spend more money in classrooms. That's why I believe that we should benchmark administrative costs of all of the school systems in the state of Connecticut so that you, in your community, can tell whether too much money is being spent on administration or school. I think we need to bring about innovations that are argued for in the federal package. We should be able to look at that document, understand what we can and can't do, and bring people to the table to get agreements to do that. I think that there are so many other innovations, but this is the bottom line. If you look at the states where educational reformation has taken place successfully, it's always been led by a governor. So this is my pitch. As mayor, I brought about a universal pre-kindergarten program in the state of Connecticut, but in my city of Stamford, 11 years ago. I also established one of the first commissions in the state of Connecticut, if not the first, on closing the achievement gap 8 years ago, but I did it out of frustration with the fact that my Board of Education wouldn't do that first. So please go to danmalloy.com and look at the educational plan that Nancy Wyman, my great running mate, who I am embarrassed I have not mentioned so far today, and I have put forward.
I want to thank Dan Malloy. If you have any other questions for Dan Malloy that you did not get to, you can go to yourpublicmedia.org and click on You Ask the Questions, because we'll have a chance to ask some questions from listeners and viewers of CPTV and WFSB during debates that are happening tomorrow and also Wednesday. You can check out yourpublicmedia.org for more details on those debates. Thank you very much for taking part today, Dan Malloy, and also in the debates coming up. I want to thank our intern, Tucker Ives, our guest producer, Patrick Scahill, producer Josie Holtzman, and senior producer Katie Tolarski. Looking ahead on the program, Rob Simmons has a Senate campaign that's back up and running. We'll have him tomorrow. Mike Fedeli is here on Wednesday. You can always join the conversation on air and online, WNPR.org, keyword where. Thanks for joining us.